Welcome to another episode of the Afikra podcast. Today we have two, dare I say, iconic artists who are on the series. We have Joana Hadjithomas and Khalil Joreige, who are artists and filmmakers who describe themselves as researchers, which we'll talk about in a moment. Their work questions the fabrication of images and representations, the construction of imaginaries, and the writing of contemporary history. Together, they've directed numerous films that have been shown and awarded in the most important international film festivals around the world, including Memory Box, Smyrna, the Lebanese Rocket Society, I Want to See, and Khiam 2007, among many others. Their artworks are part of major private and public collections, including at places including the British Museum, the MCA Chicago, Sharjah Art Foundation, the Solomon R. Guggenheim, and the V&A in London, and have been exhibited all over the world. It is my extreme pleasure to welcome them both to Afikra. Joana, Khalil, welcome to Afikra.
Hello.
Hello, happy to be with you.
Joana, I'm going to start a question to you, and then I'd love to hear Khalil's version of this. As far as you're concerned, when did you first start thinking to yourself, you know what, we are a team of artists and researchers who will be working together for a prolonged period of time? And no, I am one person and Khalil is one person. We work totally separately. No, we are a team and we are going to be working together for decades.
There's many versions that I could, many answers and many versions, but I never really thought of myself like this, and as Khalil, like a collective, a duo. We are not very into this kind of projection. You know, if what happened to us is that we decided at an early age when we met that we would work together, we would live together, we would share everything together. And this, I think, was the cement of what we are doing now. It was a decision. It was not a very conscious decision. Like, we didn't say like, okay, we're going to work together. We didn't see ourselves at that moment as artists or filmmakers. We didn't study art and film, Khalil. We didn't know anyone who was in this field. It was a very intimidating thing to feel that you could be part of something like that, or even to project yourself and to feel.
If I had to add things, okay, most of the time, Joana and me, when we are part of conversation, we are seated next to each other. And this is one of the few times where we are not in the same country. Even. So Joana is in Beirut and I'm in Paris. To go back to the question, from the beginning, we knew that we want to share things, but we didn't imagine that it will last for so long. Even our relation was, okay, let's try. Let's take the risk, dare to do things, to be, to work in a certain way that was considered always very intense, very full committed. So everybody was saying, yeah, but it will last just for a week, a month, a year, a decade. And now little by little, we are also surprised because we never conceive it as a project at the beginning, meaning a project trying to fit a definition of what we were searching and doing and our kind of relation. This is really an experimentation and a way of being.
But maybe we can say another version that also this idea of working together, it's because we don't have a lot of separation between what we do and the way we live. And there's a lot of connection between our life and the art that we are doing, or the film that we are doing. It's all about encounters, people that we meet, but also things that we stumble upon, you know, adventures, and we are very, we like a lot to follow what happened in our lives. And maybe this is something also very important in the way we experiment. For example, if we say that we are researcher. Of course, the idea is not to say that we are scientific researcher, or the idea is more to say that we are searching for something. We love inquiries. We love to follow a question or a person, a story, and to see how it will unfold. And,
well, I want to come in at that idea of being a researcher, because I get what you're saying insofar as you're not scientific researchers, but you're looking for an answer. You're looking for answers, maybe plural is the right idea. I feel like in looking at your work, the broader question that I think you're trying to answer is, how did we get here? And how did we get here, this world that we're living in? You know, like what led us to this point? This complicated, specifically fractured Lebanon that we live in. How did we get here? Does that sound right? Or is there a different answer that both of you are trying to get towards, or a different question that both of you are trying to answer with your work?
Maybe when we started working with photography and images with Khalil, there was this question about what happened and how to live our present today, how to live with what happened, and to project ourselves in a future, in the present simply. And so we looked at all the representation that we had, the images that we inherited, all those construction and fabrications, and we felt that we need to produce images that were closer to what we are, or the way we believe we can live in this present.
Khalil, I saw you shake your head at some point. How do you feel?
I will add something. It's not maybe the question of how do we get here, than a more simple present. How are we living our present, and how are we believing in it, and in the images and narration and the storytelling? Meaning everything is linked for us to that question of our present, how we believe in those images that we are using, and meaning it's a very practical thing. And it came also maybe not in the way that we want to represent things, but how the different contexts that we lived affected our narration, our use of the images. When you are showing now images of the Wonder Beirut project, for example, it is immediately linked to that notion. It's that the postcards of the 60s and the 70s of the pre-war Beirut were suddenly vehiculated and reused after the war like nothing happened. And for us, it was, okay, let's try to see images that will look like closer to what we call an imaginary. An imaginary is something that is made by fact and fiction, and both are building a kind of representation of how we see and perceive ourselves. So the question is how we can live our present, and a present that can, it go back to the first question about our relation, that maybe will last a little bit longer than an immediate presence.
But also maybe one of the questions that was always very present to Khalil and me, and I think it's very present for many, many artists, filmmakers, but also Lebanese citizens, it's like, how do you live in a present when you don't have a shared history? Like when history, not only of the civil war, but also beyond this moment, is not taught in schools, is not shared. We don't agree on common history and common facts. And so how do you deal with the past to be able to live your present? And often, so for Khalil and me, it's not about coming back to war or to images of war when we started, because when we started, it's more like taking those images and those and making them telling other stories. stories maybe that are kept secret, stories that are not the official history, but that has a lot to do with memory and history. See, and so Wonder Beirut, for example, is one of our first projects where we tackled this idea of producing postcards of war to inscribe this past that at the moment was not talked about at all. That was a recent past. This is a project that we made that we started in 1998. So the war was not very far at that moment. And so how to inscribe those events in images of the past, but also that could be used today.
I want to talk about that period. So many of our listeners who are connected to Lebanon don't remember the 90s. And I'm curious, what was it like being an artist and thinking through these ideas in that post-war Beirut? I moved to Lebanon in 2000. I moved back with my family in 2000. And for me, the year 2000 felt like so far from the war, like 10 years had passed. Now, when I think back to it, I'm like, wow, it was so close. What are your memories of those 90s? What did it feel like in that period? Do you have any specific memories? Khalil, I'll start with you.
Of course, we have a lot of memories of that period. It was a very strange period because when we we were not part of a scene at that moment. There was no scene, actually. There were some events, and we used to go to those events to ask questions. And little by little, it started to create links between people that were sharing a same concern. Today, they would use the word agencies. But at that time, it was maybe we were a little bit frightened that it may start again, that all those violence that we witnesses during the war times, and we put S because it was not just one period, but several different periods and several histories, where it went, where it was, how it's. This is why we were obsessed by those idea of latency, for example, those idea of that we were facing, for example, amnesty and amnesia and many other elements that were showing us that we were not able to surpass what we already lived. And maybe this is something that made us also be very critical to some projects that were happening at that time. I'm talking about very liberal projects around Solidaire and Hariri's project to rebuild the country, turned only towards economy and money making, I would say.
Yeah, maybe if we go back to the 90s, the country was going out of the war. There was a lot of ghosts still, like Khalil was saying, a lot of things that were still latent. But also you have this impression of reconstruction. Everything was being rebuilt. But at the same time, there was no conversation about what happened to us all those years during the Civil War. So it was like there's no time between a time of war and a time of peace. You know, there's no moment where you try to understand. And I think a lot of artists of that period were asking questions and sharing those anxieties, like, and trying to say, like, no, this period is not to be put into brackets. You know, we have to rebuild a country in a different way. We also have to rebuild a society. Not only rebuild facades and buildings and things like that and roads. And this, I think, was what we didn't really do as a country. And I feel that maybe artists, filmmakers at that time were very concerned by all those questions. And without there was not a lot of galleries that would show our work or places where you could show films. And, you know, it was very different, but it was a lot of experimentation. And I have the feeling sometimes when today that it feels a bit like the 90s, like there's a lot of, in a way, people that are living and trying their best to continue. And at the same time, there's a lot of fears, a lot of anxiety, a country that is collapsing. And of course, we were out of a collapsing moment when in the 90s. And now we are also, in a way, trying to rebuild something about ourselves. And so it feels a bit like that. And there was no institution. So there was another kind of we were trying to share a conversation and to be together. And I feel that this is back also in the country.
Yeah, it's so funny as you were describing what it felt. You said, I feel like an outsider. Khalil, you mentioned there was no scene. You would just go to stuff and hopefully you begin to meet each other and you're not sure, is it going to go back? Are we going to go back to that moment? And that is like my life right now. As somebody who lives in Beirut right now, that's how I feel. I feel like at any one moment we're going to go back. But there isn't this sort of like emphasis on reconstruction immediately, because there hasn't been any sort of political decision to do that. I mean, maybe there will be at one point, but I guess my question to you is, as somebody who might be having this like deja vu moment, I wonder what you sort of wish would happen for like some sort of healing to happen. Because, we were talking about being researchers and the question is like, not how did we get here, but maybe where we're going. And so I wonder if like what is healthy for the society is for kind of a prolonged recovery, as opposed to this sort of like rapid snap your fingers. Okay, everything's better. Let's fix the potholes and fix the roads and just move on.
Yes, this is it. This is what we were saying. We feel that through some of the artworks that we and films that we were doing, we were asking those questions. It's like, when do we heal? When do we restore something? When do we restore the link? And how do we produce other kind of images to accept what happened and to be able, to move on, but not move on in an artificial way. This project, for example, that you're showing here, called latency, was very important for us, because latency is a concept that we worked a lot on. This idea of latency is something that is still here, but you don't see it, but it is still present. And this was the feeling also in the 90s. And I think this is a feeling today also, like latent violence, latent tension that can arise at any moment. There's this fear. And so this project started in a very strange way, because Khalil was taking a lot of pictures without developing them. And little by little, we can't forget, we didn't want to forget what was on the roll. We started writing what are the films. And we felt that, this is really interesting. It goes with this idea of images that you take and that you don't see, things that you try to catch from a reality, try to grasp, but that eludes all the time. And so this project, Latent Images, is 10 years of latent photography that we are taking and describing. It's like a diary, exactly into those years from 1998 to 2006, where there was this a lot of things were evolving in the country and the city, and those images, removing those images from the flux of images and the trop-plein, all those images that we were bombarded by, was a way to keep imaginary of the viewer,
Yeah, it's a really, really, really powerful project, and I highly encourage viewers. There's some incredible videos from the project online on YouTube, where you can see a bunch more about it. I'd love to talk a little bit, maybe Khalil, I'll have you chime in, talk a little bit about the projects that you did in the Khiam in southern Lebanon. I wonder, when you think back to that project, a lot of people don't even remember the fact that southern Lebanon was occupied for so many years. What are your memories from working on that project, and what was the response immediately after the project went out and the documentary?
It came because we were we were part of an association that was trying to free the people who were detainees in South Lebanon in this detention camp, and among them Sohab Shara. They were so we were militant in an organization that was trying to, and through this activity that we came across several realities that we were not expecting. One of them was that those people who were in the camp managed to survive and to continue to progress. This is a word that they were using at that time, even if they were put in position and situations that were unhuman. So Sohab Shara stayed 6 years in a room of 1 meter by 1.5 meters alone and with nothing. And what is incredible is that those people were considering themselves as artists because they produced in detention, despite their condition and without having anything, they produced objects that they would define as artworks. And so there were a lot of questions about their schedule, because in the camp they had to work a lot. So they were saying they have no time. So the question of time and space was central here, and as another kind of experience that we cannot share. It's like a radical experience that we cannot share. And at the same time, it was another way to look at them, not anymore as victims, but as singular person who managed to survive and produce incredible artwork despite the condition. So for us, it was also a way to reconsider that, starting from a position that can be, we were looking to specificity of those people who were at that time in the camp.
It's like also, how do you make visible the experience of detention? That how can you share it? The people that we worked with on this documentary in Khiam were people that had spent like more than 10 years in this camp, in very small cells, without trial, without judgment. And they were able to disobey and to produce like what you're saying here, but also many, many artworks for them. Art saved them. And we were fascinated by this idea that those people before coming to Khiam and after, they are not artists, that they don't consider themselves as artists at all. But at that moment, to be able to keep their humanity, they fabricated what they called artworks. And this was really interesting. Not only, of course, there was a political side of showing this camp and all what happened in this camp, because every one of them, the 6 persons that are talking, so it will tell you about what happened in the camp, but also the idea that there were no images of Khiam at that moment. At the moment where we do this film, we cannot access the camp. The camp is still under occupation in the south. So with the conversation, with their description, very precise description, it's like a bit the latent images. You are able to imagine or to understand what is to be in this camp, how the camp looked like, how, like Khalil was saying, they would spend time, what their life was in the camp, but also they would describe very precisely all the artwork they did and how they spent time there, how they gained time with and they preserve their humanity.
It's also at that moment, because we worked a lot in this association with other persons that were incredible, Mireille Assar, Nahla Shahad, and other people who so we heard a lot their story. And what was incredible after, the more you spend time, the more you discover new stories. And this is where suddenly there's a huge difference between militancy and relation to a certain artwork. And the artwork, in the militant, you are trying to have the more efficient speech, I would say. You try to be efficient, meaning to hit an audience that is not convinced, where in the artwork, you start from a real interrogation and you don't know what are the answers, or at least the experimentation. So we were really very interested by how they managed to survive, to still, to say they progress in such a condition. They continue to work. They became artists in the camp, and they are not artists outside the camp. Just that, such a question is unbelievable, and you have to listen to it literally. So by doing so, you enter another word, a word that is outside militancy.
The film is two parts, because we did the first part in 2000, before the liberation of the South and the camp. And there is another part that we did in 2008, that we did in 2007, sorry, where just after the 2006 war, where we went back to meet those 6 former detainees and ask them, like, how do you feel about the destruction of the camp? And this idea was like, what do you do when a camp that was like a testimony of all what happened there disappear? Some were saying that they have to rebuild the camp. So how do you rebuild a detention camp? Do you need a physical trace of something? How do you keep memory and history? So all those questions, we are very interested in all those questions. And so this was the film where we were asking with the people that were really there, those questions, and also questioning heroism and the heroes and who write history.
Yeah. If you feel like a documentary like this, do you have a sort of a prototypical audience member in mind, or at least in your mind's eye?
No.
Like, I want this person to see this story. I want this person to think through.
It's not an audience. It's persons. Of course.
So who do you have in mind?
When you do something like this, you have in mind friends, other filmmakers, other people who went through this kind of, even them, the people, the witnesses, the people who are in your film and their friends also. It's quite bizarre because, okay, so for us, this goes back also to how we define our work. We never do a work for an audience because we don't know it. We don't. We are not good in statistics. We don't know to whom we are talking. Meaning, maybe tomorrow with ChatGPT, we will be able to think about it more. But at that time, even today, no. So I have to start from a situation that trigger me enough to ask me several questions, and it will take me for a long journey towards people, and sometimes it will hit people, and other time no.
But also an artwork has a very, or a film. People have to remember that lives of films is very long. It's not short. Because usually you get a lot of excitement when you finish a film. The film goes to festivals and is released in countries. But after that, this film, we made it, the first part of this film, we made it 22 years ago. Okay? In 2000.
1999.
1999, we shot it. 2000, we released it. This film is constantly shown everywhere in the world, and this is we there was no budget at all for this film. And I say this because maybe some filmmakers can listen to this. We did this film home with no budget at all. We edited at that time from VHS to VHS. It took a lot of time, and it was really it's a film that keeps traveling, and we have to. So the audiences evolve in time and in space, and so films and art.
And even the
a bottle that you send, like a bottle in the, you don't know exactly in the water. You don't know exactly where it will go.
And even the reason why we made this film change in time. Our consideration for this film change in time. Probably at the beginning, we were very interested. We were documenting maybe for militant reasons, and then it took us somewhere else. A question of time, of space, of frame. All those were there at the beginning. Then the question of the statue of art. Then the statue of the transmission and the continuity. And so you see, so the definition, the way that you look at a film or an artwork will change in time, and it's not one that will take it's like a palimpsest. So you are accumulating and sedimenting several layers of meanings.
Yeah, it's in many ways you're speaking to people who haven't been born yet, who you'll never know. It's interesting because the second incarnation, Joanna, you mentioned, they wanted to rebuild the camp. In many ways, your film is the rebuilding, right? And in many ways, your film is the sort of testament to the existence of the camp.
Yes and no.
Sort of,
yes and no, because we will never do something that will it will ask question more than become history.
I
mean, unintentionally, Khalil. I mean, it's unintentionally become that, without your intention.
Because there's a lot of things that we have to be very careful about. The fact that it's true that a film like that is a document, in a way, because those are witnesses that are talking. But sometimes we deal with history without being historians. Because they have another way to process events and facts, and we work in a very different way. But sometimes, and it's funny because now we are in Beirut for a seminar that we are organizing with Metropolis and with the Cinematheque Beirut, and we're talking a lot about traces, keeping, archiving, and why all the images that are done in a way are documenting because of this absence of history and the lack that we feel that we are not linked to, that you always feel that history is repeating, but history is never repeating in a way. But there is no clear view to us of all those events. For your generation or younger generation, they were saying that maybe people forgot some events, and it's natural.
Yeah.
So sometimes films are here also because those were witnesses and they had time to talk with us and to deliver something about it.
Yeah, it's amazing. I want to ask you one more question about this. You both alluded to the idea that you were outsiders. You were not from, quote unquote, the scene. Is that something that you feel it was sort of a superpower, a little bit of a strength? It allowed you to approach subjects with a different vantage point and a different look. And then secondly, do you feel like you can still remain outside the scene and have a different angle over the course of your career?
I think the fact that, we didn't really study art and films with Khalil. So it gave us a kind of freedom without knowing it, because when we started, we didn't feel that it was a freedom. We felt that it was for us, it was more a problem. But with time, we felt that maybe it gave us the freedom of not having rules, not having acquired some rules. And so we often say that we don't want to define ourselves because we don't like definitions, and we can be like working together. Where usually, artist is more like, it's not a duo. We can make films and art. We can make in a short film, a documentary, a feature film. We can work with people that are very known, like we see here, Catherine Deneuve, but we can also work with people that had never made any film, and a lot of non-professional actors. We can, you know, you could, and in artwork, you can do sculpture, installation, photography. There's no limits because there's no definitions. And I think it's more the fact that we put ourselves in more margins because we are not, a lot of people want to see, like, how do you consider yourself, artists or filmmakers? And how do you work with Khalil? And how do you know all those questions? And those questions, I don't really have an answer. I just, like, this is why I feel we started saying researchers, because there's a question, you send this question and you don't have answers. Don't think that at the end we have answers, but we have like a lot of elements to have maybe some possibilities.
I will go back to the first questions about how we started and why we started. And maybe because, like Joana was saying, because we have no tools to defend, I would say. We don't have to demonstrate, for example, if I was trained as a photographer, but I'm not defending a certain photography. I will use photography with certain of its aspects and relation to the real to be able to think perception. But I will never try to fetishize a certain technique because I was born into it. If I go back to a sentence Joana is using now in her seminar, she went back to a sentence by René Char about heritage and testimony. And I don't know the translation in English, but Joana know it. What is it?
Our heritage was preceded by no testament. Something.
It's a beautiful sentence that we consider that is at the heart of our approach to especially Lebanon. And in Lebanon, if you look at even our 100 years of history, it's full of rupture. But these rupture are never the same. It's never the same reason. So you have to acknowledge each rupture for itself and see what are the possibility of creating an understanding from these ruptures. This is at the core of a lot of our questions.
But also we are interested in ruptures because we are also interested in the way you regenerate also. No.
Yeah, of course. One of my favorite sayings is that history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And in Lebanon, that's definitely true. The ruptures rhyme as in perfect verse. But I want to ask you about one of the projects that is sort of outside of the straight line of looking at sort of ruptures, and that's the Lebanese Rocket Society, sort of the film that you guys created. What's the story of how you first came across this work and why it didn't just turn into a really fun sort of cocktail party story that, oh, did you guys know that this is a thing? And turned into a real research project, so to speak.
Have to tell you that it's not, we're not only interested in ruptures, just to say, so to link to this story. It's more this idea of necessity. You know, it's like something that you feel today is a necessity for you. Like, how do you work with something like it's not, you don't have subjects. You see, you do an encounter. These encounters make you think about something. You feel that it answers a necessity, and then it started. For Lebanese Rocket Society, we had heard about the story like for a very long time by my sister. My sister came and said, did you know like that there is a space project? There was a space project in the 60s. And we felt, oh, interesting. But the moment where we really started working on it, it was a moment around 2008, 2009, where we were questioning dreams. Like, what are the dreams of our society? Why don't we allow ourselves to dream bigger? So we were trying to see like why those populations we don't demonstrate, we don't get along, we don't fight. It was something that how do we represent ourselves? We were around all those questions, and suddenly we felt seeing back those images like, wow, this is really a project that is interesting. If we really had a space project, why is it forgotten, totally forgotten? And maybe those dreamers made something that we are disconnected from in a way. So those groups of people that in the 60s in a small Armenian university in Haigazian started to make rockets for space exploration, and little by little created the Lebanese Rocket Society, where people who felt totally connected with the rest of the world, they felt themselves as contemporary researchers, scientific this time, that were making rockets, and rockets that were not for military purposes. It was rockets for scientific
peace,
for education, for space exploration. So suddenly for Khalil and me, it was really about a lot of things that we wanted to explore at that time. So of course, we wanted to say the story that was incredible. We wanted to ask why it is forgotten. Is it about representation of ourselves and the way now we don't dream of ourselves in the same way? We don't project ourselves in the same way. And also the idea, we always like to put, when you search for rockets on Google, usually you would find the rocket in Lebanon. It will always be for military purposes. And what if we will change a bit? We will shift that idea of rocketry in Lebanon. And so this is how we started this project. And this project gave us a lot. And we were really, it became a film and many artworks that are in the film. Also.
Yeah, it's interesting because the reason why I loved hearing what you just said, Joana, I have to say, because in so many ways in Lebanon, our history is dangerous, and which is why it's not taught. But just like you said, our dreams are dangerous too. Our dreams are potent and scary. Our aspirations collectively are dangerous, and so it's almost like there's a persistent effort to make sure that we don't remember these aspirations and don't remember previous dreams, because heaven forbid that we actually realize our potential, then who knows what will happen if we get out of the gutter.
Of course, and this idea was also to produce images of a different kind, because we said that when we started talking that we want to produce also representation and images that are closer to us. So by doing this film and some of the artworks, we were reproducing and showing images that we feel were closer to us. And like the images that we did at the end, the Uchronia, the science fiction images, that I feel we don't produce enough or we don't see enough in the region. So maybe a way to produce those images in 2013, 2011, what we made the film, was also an idea to be able to dream of an uncertain future maybe, but to project ourselves.
Yeah. I want to ask you about Memory Box before we do the quick Q&A. Memory Box is your most recent film, which came out in 2021 to enormous critical acclaim globally. I wanted to ask you, are you nervous? Do you ever get nervous when films like this that are so critically acclaimed globally get screened in Lebanon? Is there a heightened sense of nervousness? Like, I hope people here also really, really love it.
Ask Khalil about how I am before.
Yeah, Khalil, tell us about it.
Was able to be even in the theater when it was projected. No, but Lebanon is always for us, of course, the place where it imports us, meaning we live between Beirut and abroad. We live, but Maybe when we were saying that we have no audience, but we have a lot of persons with whom we are having a kind of continuous conversation. And a lot of those persons are also in Lebanon. Or for us, even if they are not in Lebanon, they can be in Lebanon. So for us, it's very important to continue, because it's a fight today, to show this kind of works in Lebanon. This is what Metropolis Cinema used to do, and with the crisis, we have to create again the possibility of showing different things in Lebanon, be it films or artwork. Because of the situation today, it is becoming harder and harder. So for us, of course, an audience is in Lebanon is very important, but it's not the only one. Of course, it's an international audience, an audience also from our peer, meaning when you are selected in great festivals, when you have certain critics that you read that are suddenly pointing your film as you discover also things in your film through the eyes of the others. And this is also a question about the time, about how it's always a place of work. Critics are important even for the filmmakers, not just for their ego, but to understand what they are doing.
But maybe, yes, showing the film in Lebanon is always a very emotional moment and a very scary moment, because you feel that people, they don't only judge your films, they judge so many things. But here we say with Khalil a lot that we try to create in a way, or to link in a territory that is not only a geography, but also a territory of film and art, because I feel that this is what we have to create also. But of course, my geography is Lebanon, and all what we've been doing with Khalil, we are very, very, we are not at all disconnected from the country. We spend like half of the year here or more. So we know exactly our audience in a way. And with Memory Box, it was very difficult, because in a way, this film was made in 2019. It was made, we shot the film before October 2019, and we were in a very different mood. Like, the idea was that this is a film that is based on notebooks and tapes that I sent to my best friend in the 80s, and on images that Khalil made at that time. So it was a kind of conversation that we were doing, and those images and notebooks were telling a story, a history, a bit of our history to another generation of our daughter, But suddenly, the film started to sound very differently, to rhyme differently. It was, to echo. And after the collapse and after the blast, we were still editing the film, So we had to really rethink about the movie, and where the movie had a different kind of storytelling. Suddenly, people were crying in the theater. So it became something totally different. But in Memory Box, also something else. In this film, it's one of the films where we most tried, Khalil and me, to link our words, the words of film and the word of art, and to put a lot of our experimentation in art in a film that is, in a way, accessible to many generations, our parents, our generations, the generation of our children. So, and this for us, the fact that it was seen like that in Lebanon and other countries, but also especially here where we work, when we produce all those images, was very important for us.
So my last question to you both, if you were to give advice to a 22-year-old version of yourself who's living in Beirut now, in 2023 Beirut, right? And says to you, everybody's gone, there's no scene left, Metropolis is closed, Metro Medina is closing, there's all these places that are closing, everybody's leaving, khalas, I should leave. I should go start my career somewhere else. I should go make art somewhere else. Who knows? It's going to be, it may descend into chaos again. What am I doing here? What is the advice?
Not everybody's leaving because...
Of course. So yeah, so give the advice. Khalil, I'll start with you. What's the advice that you tell this person?
Meaning I would say it's not a career. Don't take it as a career, because at the moment, people start to make a confusion between working and having a career, meaning the art world, for example, and the art market, which are not exactly the same. We never worked for the market. Little by little, a market happened, but it was not the intention. So if we consider that it can be a long journey full of great intensity, hard work, it deserves, because the situation deserves it. What's happening in terms of context is unbelievably interesting, because we have to deal with these contexts to be able to reinvent ourselves, to reinvent possibility of being in such places in an interesting way. So for me, it's a very challenging. So you go back to the core of what drives us.
Joana, do you have a similar answer?
Yeah. I'm not very good at advices, but I will ask first this person about his quest. What is the necessity? What is his quest? And then I will tell him that I feel, if you want, that Lebanon is a very dangerous and intense place, but it's also a place that gives a lot. And like Dominique, they said lately, she wrote something that is, Lebanon is something like that, where the future happens first, you know. And so I feel that in a way, what happened in Lebanon is very, not so, it's close to what will happen somewhere else. But you have to have the energy to live it. You have to have the necessity to stay here. You have to have also the faith that you want to change something. Metro Medina is not closing, it's relocating. Metropolis didn't close. It will open again. But also I can understand that it's very difficult for people to project today. And I can understand that something is very sad, something is very desperate. And from time to time, I am very sad and desperate also. But I feel that if it depends on the quest, my quest is here, my research, my inquiry, my necessity is here. And so I will just say that if he leaves, he will be back. And if he stays, he can leave and come back. It's not about, nothing has to be definitive, you know, doesn't have to take a this decision for life. And so I would say always explore with freedom.
Amazing. I want to ask you only one of the questions from the quick Q&A before we wrap up, because I want to respect your time. And that's the question: what do people most misunderstand about your work? And I'd even say people who are close to you, like friends and family, people who are rooting for you. What do you think they sort of misunderstand fundamentally about what you do? Joana, I'm going to start with you, and then Khalil, you can wrap us up.
Many things. I would say that people that would say, "Oh, your work is about the war." Big misunderstanding. Our work is about the present, and if war is part of it, we will talk about it. But or the idea that our work is elitist. I think that our work is political and poetic, but it's not elitist at all. Khalil, you want me to continue, or you have something to say?
I'm not interested really in the kind of misunderstanding, because it starts with a misunderstanding. And I have to admit that we do everything to create this kind of misunderstanding, meaning we are never in the same place. So people are expecting you to be here and suddenly you are there. It's part of shifting the gaze also on situation, on us, on our practices. The reason why we start to work are not the same 20 years ago, are not the same today. There is something that is evolving, and it's good to be able to create this. It's not misunderstanding, but a renewal, an ability to represent differently.
Maybe you wanted to say like complexity, something about complexity. You know, we feel that complexity is interesting. We feel that serendipity is interesting. And maybe it's not about that you're not interested. I'm talking to Khalil. I'm correcting Khalil here. It's not you're not interested in misunderstanding, but you accept misunderstanding because you want to be like this person that has no definitions and who accept complexity. You know?
Yeah, it's not. I say it could be misunderstanding, but it is not misunderstanding, because misunderstanding, but it can. It can be also something that in time will evolve. There's works that I was not found at all, and with time, I love them. So it's part of a process, not just in you, but in your connection, presence, and relation to the words. There's people that you miss today, and suddenly their work become much more necessary or in a different way. All that is very, meaning all that will push you to understand the context in a different way.
But also maybe, Khalil, this idea of complexity is something that we have to accept in a world that goes more and more into simplification. And that, so it's a kind of resistance to it. So this being complex, being not with, so it has its part of misunderstanding.
Yeah. It's like it's almost like the dissonance of the music, of the chord, forces you to try to reconcile things that don't always, they're irreconcilable, but it forces the audience member or the viewer to search or to research a possible reconciliation, whether it's there or not. But at least it forces them to sort of look around and turn the thing upside down and look for some sort of answer. And
then you find something new or something different, or you
exactly
find something you missed or you've forgotten.
Yeah, precisely. Well, I want to wrap up because I want to respect your time. Anyone listening to the podcast can find your work online all over the place and showcased all around the world. It has been a real privilege to be able to speak to you. I'm an enormous fan of your work. So thanks so much for spending an hour with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.